It was the only problem with that. The first 2 years was from 90 to 92. I was an active alcoholic. So I was providing the instability in my life during that time.
Ooh, nicely said. Ooh, taking
Yeah.
extreme ownership. Come
Oh,
on.
for sure. For sure.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Another fantastic day for an interview because I've got Tom Spooner with me. Tom Spooner is the co-founder and director of Warriors Heart, and he has got Warriors very close to his heart because he has been a former Delta Force operator. He has been 21 years in the United States military, and he is a man who has worked hard in his deployments and done all those things that you normally only see in films or read about. He is also a man who certainly has seen the darkness in the past, a man who has undergone a hell of a transformation and who is, I think, a role model as far as resilience goes for many, many reasons, in the many ways that he transformed and the many new roles that he has taken on successfully. Can't wait to talk to you. Tom, welcome to my show.
Stefan, thanks for having me. Very excited to be on the show and looking forward to our conversations.
My goodness, 21 years as an operator. In other words, kicking ass and taking names. In your case, kicking doors and taking names is probably an equally as appropriate thing. How did you get into that? Were you always, or did you grow up in a military family? And was that all on the cards for you?
Yeah, it was two of my greatest inspirations and role models when I was growing up was my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, and my uncle, who was a three-tour Vietnam veteran. So those guys were my inspiration and men that I looked up to. And I've always wanted to join the military since I was a little kid. So that was what got me on the road.
I mean, it is one thing to join the military because you try to escape maybe poverty or try to find a way for yourself and then take on a military specialty that allows you to do electronics and all those beautiful things without which the military, the tip of the spear wouldn't work. So it's one thing to be in the military for 21 years somewhere on bases and doing that versus becoming clearly infantry and becoming clearly the tip of the spear. Why or how did that journey start?
The journey, well, we said the why, you know what I mean, is that's what I've always wanted to do.
Touché.
Yeah. That was my inspiration, and I've always wanted to do it. There was a bit of, in my past, like you said, wanting to join the military to get away. You know, I mean, my father was an alcoholic growing up, not an abusive alcoholic, but nonetheless, you know, not the normal family. And I was from a very small town in South Florida. I mean, I just wanted to go. So it was a double win for me. You know, I always wanted to join the military, and it got me on my way. But how I joined was when I was 20 years old. I attempted to go to college for a couple of years. I say attempted because I was in active alcoholism at that time. So I was, I did much. I had a lot of fun, but not a lot of education went on. You know, so all the roads were leading to me joining as fast as I could. So when I was 20, I joined the military in Florida, and then it was the summer of 1990. Which during that time, that was when Iraq invaded Kuwait, you know, and the Gulf War happened. Prior to that, you know, there weren't any wars going on. A little Panama, a little Grenada, And so whenever I joined, when I was at basic training, that's whenever Iraq invaded Saudi Arabia, and finished basic AIT at Fort Benning, Georgia, jump school. And then I went to the 82nd in North Carolina at Fort Bragg for just a few months. And then I went to the Gulf War. So I went from being a civilian straight into war. So that really set the tone for my military career from that point on. And, like any really good alcoholic, I'm not sure about you, but I always saw my life playing out as a movie. Like I'm the badass in the scene, and hey, what do you do before you go to war? Well, you get married, because yeah.
Well, that's an old tradition. I'm sure a lot of young men in your family would have done that. Your grandfather, maybe, your uncle, maybe.
Yeah, because you're going over to war, you might die, you get married, and then you're a hero and all that great stuff. So I got married. Went to the Gulf War, and then I spent the next 5 years in the 82nd, so in the conventional army, but in the paratroopers. So I spent from 90 to 95 in that unit. Then from
I was about to say, that was still a time when, however, there was a certain degree of stability within the United States Armed Forces, whilst there were a lot of lessons to be learned with regards to this kind of quotation mark peacetime, quotation mark downturned army after the Vietnam War, towards the crazy speed of deployments and zero time or a few nominal weeks or months in between deployments that then happened much later in your career. This was still stability to a degree, and therefore maybe even a chance that your marriage was even prospering, at least for a little while. Is that fair to say? Were things actually providing stability?
It was. The only problem with that, the first 2 years was from 90 to 92, I was an active alcoholic. So I was providing the instability in my life during that time.
Nicely said. Ooh, taking extreme ownership. Come on.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And when you say that, having said that, that was also still the time when alcohol was prevalent within the United States forces and probably many other forces around the world, for crying out loud. 90s, that was when... sort of going back, I was 8. No, I was 10 years earlier when I would have been in the draft, but I became St. John's. I became a paramedic instead, part-time. So I chose a different life. But at that time, the troops had rationed 2 bottles of beer every day. That was part of the German ration, just as you do. So it was, if you weren't an alcoholic before you went into the German army, you certainly were one afterwards. That was taken for granted. So it was actually a very wet environment in which you practiced, was it not?
It was, absolutely. Yeah, and I always, took it too far. There was people that drank normally, and I did not. But the thing about it was, even whenever I was super high functioning, as far as on the military side of the house, whenever I joined, like I said, I've always wanted to, and I was, come to find out, I was pretty good at it. So it was, so I just loved it. And I did accomplish, like I went to Ranger school, I got promoted to sergeant. I was like a golden boy, as far as a poster boy for, hey, this is how you should be in the professional life. But in my home life and in my, personal life, it was a mess. It was really bad. And so it was really rough. And but then I got sober in 1992. September the 2nd of 1992 is my sobriety date.
How?
That's
just like that. Question. Okay, then I got sober. Yeah, boom.
Well, unfortunately, as with most things, there's a train of horrible circumstances that proceeds. So I was finally beat into submission. I had beat myself into submission with the way that I chose to live. And at that time, my wife and I became separated. Very smart woman. She's a very smart woman, and she was just like, yeah, this isn't going on anymore. And so we got separated, and I moved into the barracks. And so that was one of the key things that prompted me. There was a lot of other things. That was one of the main ones that is like, wow, I've really got a lot of problems going on in my life, and I need to do something about it. Because my two loves were my wife and the military. And my wife was gone at the time. And then I knew the military was going to be short to follow if I stayed on the path that I was on. So that's what got me into. I would like to tell you that it was like, I just woke up one morning and I wanted to work on my character. And no, that was not the case.
Then I call you Cinderella and offer you a shoe, okay?
Right.
Nice try.
But that's what prompted me into it. And so I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I started, it was the early 90s. They were downsizing, like you had mentioned, they had actually begun downsizing the Army. And, in the military at that time, there wasn't really acknowledged, alcoholism. They pretty much just put you with the crazy people, and so I was not going to seek help professionally. So, so I just went outside, and started going to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Cool. At that time, were you already on the Ranger path, in the sense of the special forces? You had done AIT, Jump School, you became sergeant, but were you already moving towards more special forces, the Rangers?
At that time, I went to Ranger school, so right. So I became Ranger qualified during that time also, which is what was partly that put me in the golden boy status.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I was still in the 82nd from 90 to 95. So
interesting.
I really enjoyed it. And the thing for me is, that's what I always say, I'm in all aspects of my life, but I'm the most blessed man that I know, to include my military career, because like during that time, early 90s, there was still a significant amount of Vietnam veterans in senior positions during that time. So, a lot of the guys that I was working for were in the books that I was reading growing up, so I was, when they say living the dream, I mean, I absolutely was.
Having said that, SOG and all the kind of special forces of the Vietnam War were not even really publicly acknowledged, really. So, but here you were, right. You were actually literally hearing the stories around the campfire. Intriguing. Cool. Now, the reason I'm asking is for you suddenly to stop drinking can make you a pariah in a community which otherwise lives on alcohol. How did you get sort of pushback? Did people consider you, a wet towel or however you want to call it, a pussy, for not drinking?
Well, there was a little bit of that. There was a little transition period for me there because, externally, my record, you know what I mean? I was this guy that had gone to all these schools, this young soldier that was an up and comer, like I said, a poster boy status. So I had that going for me. The only transition piece was, when I stopped drinking, like a month before, I was the ringleader of this group of folks.
Okay, I hear you.
So there was a little transition period of, hey, what the fuck? I mean, like you were, now you stop drinking, guys get in trouble and they get on the wagon for a little while and whatever. But so there was a little bit of a transition, a little bit of pushback, but it was mainly on the personal side, with the friendships that I had and that piece, not so much on the professional side. Because professionally, I had, like gone to the schools and done all the things that, on the outside equal a good soldier, so there was a little bit of transition, but it was mainly on the personal side. And, I was that guy at one time, like, hey, if you don't drink, I don't trust you, or you don't drink, you're not a
Exactly.
warrior. All that,
Exactly.
right? So I was that guy at one time.
Exactly. Well,
So I was armed and capable of dealing with myself, basically.
well, after the Vietnam War, there was in the SEALs, for example, there is the leaders that sort of came out of Vietnam War were hard charging and incredibly hard drinking, and alcohol was the key lubricant. And it was literally, you don't drink, you don't belong here. So it was that harsh, and also quite catastrophic to a certain degree, because it had its flow-on effects. Out of interest, once you stopped drinking, did your soldiering improve? Did your physical tests improve? Did your resilience, your endurance, how did that change? Did you notice a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the fears that I had was getting sober. Like, who would I become? I mean, I didn't have a point of reference. I didn't get sober and become a hippie. I mean, I got sober and became an even better warrior. But there was a fear factor because I didn't know, like, I had all these prejudices, and everything that I'd grown up with was, if you were someone that was following the path of God, you know what I mean, and we're doing the things that you were supposed to be doing, that basically, in my mind, this was just in my mind, but if I was going to commit and turn my will and my life over to a power greater than myself, that meant that I was going to put on a white robe and go down to Central America and South America and just build churches and not have a life. Like, that was going to be it. And I didn't really want to do that. I mean, I was grateful that there were people that were doing that, but I wanted to continue on this military path that I was doing so good in, and really wanted to. So none of that happened. To your point, I got sober, and now I became a more efficient, a more effective, from a physiological aspect, all the way to cognition, all the way to being able to plan. And then for the first time, my professional life and my personal life were at the same level. Instead of professionally being really good and personally being really bad, I was now professionally really good and also personally, on the path anyway. And so, it was how I excelled in the rest of my military career, was because I was sober, for me anyway.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It is certainly the alcohol is such a destructive force, but when we're in the middle of it, I mean, there is always a damn good reason that we do drink, typically to escape our reality. And there are, in the military, there are certainly damn good reasons why that is, why we want to escape our reality. The issue of trauma and PTSD can sometimes be considered nearly a cliche or nearly a given, as far as warriors are concerned, however you want to play it. It is, having said that, so far you were, I don't want to call it blessed, that you only had the Gulf War, where maybe you were not as much exposed to sort of the direct trauma on you yourself and the immediate group of brothers around you. However, that would change down the line, inevitably. When did the transition occur? Oh, you told me already when, but what was the catalyst of you becoming more specialized in your work?
Yeah, so I spent 5 years in the 82nd, and I loved it. Every moment that I was there, the men that I was with, the men I was learning from. But I always wanted to, I was always trying to do more. I was always like, hey, do I have what it takes to be at the next level? I was a young man, just so the next level for me was to go to Special Forces selection. I had been to Ranger School. That was a big deal. Jump Master School, Pathfinder, Air Assault, everything that I could do whenever I was in the 82nd, I had done. And so the next thing for me was to go to Special Forces selection. And I did that in December of 1995.
You really like the cold, don't you? I mean, that's
I
right.
hate the cold. The funny thing is like that's like the irony of it all, right? I'm from South Florida. I despise the cold. You know,
Yeah.
where I grew up, if it was 50 degrees outside Fahrenheit, you know, you didn't even go outside. You know, you'd probably die in it. So
Okay.
yeah, that's the irony of my life. Every stupid military school I ever went to was in the dead of winter.
I
Two
was
and three.
about to say, for Christ's sake. Okay,
Yeah.
well, here you go. But did you pass the first time through?
I did. I was very prepared, very in really good shape, and I passed it. But like I said, I had a good solid foundation. I had a solid foundation in sobriety, and I had a foundation as far as just being a soldier. You know, I spent 5 years developing that, and
Good
then
idea.
whenever
Yeah.
I went into the next one, yeah, I mean, it
But
was
Ranger School, the attrition rate is quite significant, isn't it?
It is. Every step of my journey along the way was the hardest thing I had ever done at that moment, you know. So,
And that's the fear
so
inoculation. But that's how you
yeah,
grow resilience. That's how you
it is.
create super warriors, men who are going out there and then doing feats that normal people
Right.
don't struggle to even fathom what is going on. So that's all part and parcel of it. But I mean, it's one thing to say, "Oh yeah, I've done that and it's all my grit." But it's interesting. There is obviously more going on there because you thrive on adrenaline, you thrive on challenge, you thrive in that environment, which becomes so important later on when we take all that away. Because
Wow.
typically
Yeah.
what happens is that people say, yeah, I love it. I mean, the external validation, the, hey, look at me, I'm that badass. In my
Yep.
case, oh, look at me, I'm the doctor. Oh, I'm a pain
Right.
physician. That's great. No, Stefan, who are you? I just told you I'm a doctor, I'm a pain physician. You're right. And then you strip it away. And then the question remains, who the fuck are you? And I,
Yeah.
for a long time, had no answer. But we'll come to that, no doubt. No
Yes.
doubt. So you're still at the moment there. But here you are, not drinking, going through very hard times.
Right.
And how did you escape your reality? There are times, the dark nights of the soul. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, for me, a couple of things happened. So on the personal side, my wife and I got back together after a year being separated. At no doing of my own, other than, you know, I had cleaned my life up, I got sober, and I was being a decent human being, you know, and not drinking, you know. So that was the aspect. So my wife was with me, so that was good. And then the thing throughout my entire career from September the 2nd of 92 to today, you know, whenever I say I was sober, that means that I have a sponsor. I sponsor guys. I take them through the 12 steps. I attend meetings. Like I am, you know, even though I've been doing it for 31 years, I act as if, you know what I mean? Hey, I'm a day one kind of guy, you know, because that's how I was raised in sobriety, you know, and in the military and in my personal life was, don't forget where you come from, boy. You know, that's kind of that's
Nice.
how I was raised personally and professionally and in AA, you know. And so my, you know, my reality check, my decompression, all of that came from the mind, body, and spirit work that I would do through the vehicle, you know, of Alcoholics Anonymous, partly, and then the rest of it was just learning how to be a good brother, learning how to be a good husband, learning how to be a good soldier, you know, just the service aspect of it. Throughout the thread of my existence, the one thing that has held it all together, meaning me, is sobriety. You know, my sobriety, without it, I have nothing for long.
Beautiful. And you could say a lot against the military, and you can say a lot about, you can bedevil the military, but one thing that you see is a lot of people and how they function. Therefore, you see also a lot of leaders, both extremely good leaders who you would follow into hell and back, and also leaders who you quite happily wish an accident to. So, you know, I think there is a lot to be said about leadership and learning lessons. And then if you actually have the emotional intelligence to use those lessons and also apply those lessons of, let's say, integrity,
Right.
of authenticity, of actually doing the right thing when no one is watching. When you
Right.
apply that to your life, suddenly miracles happen. And often,
Absolutely.
and so often, however, if you do that in one area of your life, yet when you then look into the private area of someone, you think, oh my God, there's so much about that.
Yeah,
And I
and the
think,
consistency, like you said, that was the biggest thing that I learned, is that I needed to be consistent.
hmm,
Uh, Obviously, it depends on the audience that you're with, and communicating with the audience appropriately. But that consistency where, at work, I'm the same way as I am whenever
hmm,
I'm at home, or if I'm at the grocery store, if
hmm,
I'm around this set of friends, those set of friends,
hmm,
developing that consistency, which is me, which,
hmm,
because the only consistency I can create is myself. We know life, tragedies happen to everyone,
yeah.
no matter what's going on or what you're doing. So, yeah, that was the consistency, like you said, is one of the big things in my life.
Hmm. Having said that, so here you are, um, having learned all these lessons, often enough the hard way, and you've become this resilient man, and you're reaping the rewards, both in your private life and keeping your sanity to a certain degree,
Yes.
which certainly would have been incredibly challenging things through future deployments, as once you actually joined the special forces. Um, Having said that, here we are, fast forward into 2024, where we continue to see a huge amount of destructive, destructive. How shall I call it? Let's call it what it is. There's a huge
Yeah.
epidemic of warriors taking their life, of warriors
Yeah.
coming home from deployments, being burned out, falling prey to alcohol, drugs, and whatever. And basically, what are the current statistics? How frequent do vets die nowadays?
Yeah. The consistent number that is posted, and it fluctuates back and forth, but the one that we just hold on to, however inaccurate it is 22 a day.
Exactly.
Veterans commit suicide, and they
Exactly.
have been since, I think, 2004.
Yeah.
So for 20 years, I mean, you can do the math on that
Mm.
as far as the numbers that have, either taken their own lives from behavioral health
Yeah.
circumstances, but the majority of those, there's some kind of chemical related to it, whether it's alcohol and drugs, with folks take the last final act. But
Which is
yeah,
which in its own right is actually quite bizarre. So obviously you could say, oh, the military does not prepare people towards the transition into civilian life. You can blame
right,
others. Having said that, the military has changed over 20 years. Also, deployments have changed.
right,
It has been crazy at times when units had very little time to decompress in between deployments.
right.
Having said that, there are huge changes, yet we have got this figure of 22 that you state that are more or less remaining the same. That does not make sense. You would expect that to fluctuate hugely. Um, I assume that the issue of, let's say, marital breakdown, domestic and family violence, that those things have increased over time. I certainly have seen statistics that were fluctuating far more than the 22 per day suicides.
Right.
Um, how do you what do you think is leading to that discrepancy?
Well, if someone is an alcoholic or addict, that's an obvious answer to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They haven't. But there's just talking about that. It was the same things that I experienced once I got out. I was fortunate enough to be sober throughout, and yes, the military was a huge part of my identity because you can't do that job and not be all in on it. But because I was sober, I had a good balance between, being a warrior and a professional soldier, volunteer, doing all that stuff, and also being a father to my two sons, meaning a good husband to my wife. Because I was sober, I had the ability to process a lot of those emotions, to have somewhat of an identity and purpose of my own. And then, so once I got out of the military, it was still a very, very hard transition, just because of, if you do something for 21 years, like anyone's going to have a hard transition with that.
Absolutely.
But I had the tools in my toolbox already to at least begin the approach of asking the questions, who am I now and what do I do now?
Nice.
So the folks that don't have the tools, they don't have the purpose, they don't have a direction, they don't have the support, and all they have is loads of PTSD and moral grief and injury, and then throw alcohol and prescription meds on top of that. I mean, so that's the one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, only 1% of the U.S. military, of the U.S., 1% of the U.S. serves in the military. So there's this ginormous divide, unintentional, but just by mere numbers of like, hey, there's only 1% of the U.S. population that serves in the military. So there's all these people that really can't relate, or they don't know anyone that's in the military. It's just on TV, on the news. They don't really know that. And it's not anyone's fault, that's just a mathematical equation,
Interesting.
Yeah. If you look at it, because obviously, in 31 years, I've done a lot of studying on this topic, and then my own experience. If you look at like what happened in World War II, in the transition of that piece, everyone had buy-in in that, right? So really nothing can be compared to that war and those timeframes, because everyone was all in. The majority of the military age males were, were in war, and then the majority of the supporters, were supporting it. So everyone was connected, whereas now, we're at the other end of the spectrum of that. And again, to no one's fault. But that's a huge factor, is a lot of the communities that these warriors are coming home to, people they don't really relate. The divide is just so great.
Have people forgotten already the lessons of 9/11? However,
of course.
Okay.
Of course. What do we have the lifespan of about that? We have the, and that's a great point, and I love bringing up that point because, say and I'm just speaking for the U.S. because that's the experience that I've had with, at post 9/11. The whole country was rallied around, going over and, and seeking revenge.
Rightly or wrongly so.
What it is.
Rightly or wrongly so. Let's just accept it though as buy-in of a population after a direct attack on their soil.
Yeah, and our mission was, hey, the enemy had come over and killed all of these civilians on our home soil. So the mission was repayment for that, and to keep them from conducting any future attacks on our soil, which to that mission statement, we did. But then back to what we were saying, most people, especially nowadays, but even in those times, after 5 years of that war, it's like, Then after 10 years of that war, those people that experienced 9/11, the majority of the older, people that had grown, they're like, we don't really need to do this anymore. And then 20 years into the, so you can see how easily. So yes, 9/11 is a far, far cry away. you
Plus,
know.
you then had opposite forces like the blame of weapons of mass destruction, which then was disproven, and there were questions about the leadership at the highest level, and continuing questions, please. So, so you're living in a very divided nation, and that I think is taking far more a toll on common sense than we like to give it justice. Ah, bloody hell! But there you are. It still leaves young men and women who are going out there to improve themselves often enough, like you were. You
Yes,
joined the military to get out of the small town, and
right.
the same applies nowadays.
Yeah.
So. Uh, why do you think that all those changes that the military has made, the offering of transition services, etc., why do you think that the figure of suicide is not changing?
Yeah, so I come in from a little bit of a different viewpoint, but it's mine. And having experienced, 40 months of combat, I can safe to say that the U.S. military, the military is designed to do one thing, and that's destroy the enemies of our country.
Sure.
That is what it's about. We can't pretty it up and make it nice. It was meant for the destruction of our enemies. So to take a human being that is not a psychopath or a sociopath and train them with the ability to take another human being's life is a full-time job, and that is what the military does. And they do it well. Now you can't ask that same organization
Okay.
that whose sole mission to do that to now we want you to also prepare them to not do that anymore and become something different.
Okay.
That's not logical. It's not. And if they did it, it would be a horrible job. It would be, you know what I mean? It would be like taking a monumental IT, like if you took, Apple and said, hey, now you're going to start, you're going to make machine guns now. Well, they could come up with a very smart plan of doing that, but it would be horrible. You know what I mean?
Sure,
It would just,
sure.
that's not what they do. So
Okay.
in theory, who is supposed to pick up is the Veteran Administration,
Right.
who's supposed to take that handoff. That's why it was created. And I'm not talking negatively of the Veterans Administration. Thank God in the U.S. we have one, because a lot of countries do not. But it's a government system, which, okay, there's one thing. And then it's entirely overwhelmed. We still have a lot of the Vietnam veterans that are still alive, grateful for the ones that are. And then now you have all of these post 9/11 veterans, in that system, which was designed to, take that handoff and create the transition and receive the mental health, behavioral health, substance use disorder health, all of those things. And like I said, the people in that organization are just amazing human beings, but they're, number one, they're working in a construct that is government and all of the bureaucracy that entails, and they're completely and totally overwhelmed depending on the location. If you're in a highly veteran populated area, they're absolutely overwhelmed. If you're in the middle of somewhere in Wyoming, or Oklahoma, and that they don't have a large population, then it's very great services and treatment that they get. So that is why, so that's just what is out there, right? So that's why when it comes to Warrior's Heart, when it comes to kind of my generation of warriors, that have gotten out, and the ones that have been fortunate enough to have some tools and have some mentors and have programs, and we are now covering that gap. I mean, that's why Warrior's Heart came into existence. It was to cover a gap, not to do something a little bit better or create a new widget or enhance something, but it was, hey, if obviously what we're doing is not working. If it was, we wouldn't have 22 veterans a day committing suicide. That's just facts, not in no blame or anything. So that's where, with all the stuff that I've done, the one thing that I love the most is abstract problem solving, so in identifying gaps, right? Whether it's gaps in intelligence, gaps in coverage, but it's also, everything that I did in the military just transitioned it over to the civilian life. And what I found out that, in the military, they call it targeting, when there's bad guys and that kind of stuff. That same tactic and technique in the civilian world is called marketing. It's principally the same thing. Obviously very different, but principally is the exact same way. So that's where, again, not talking negative about anything of anybody else that's doing it. It's just, that's one of the things that I, as a passion, have done, is sobriety. And obviously this population is my population, and to care for them is what I've done my whole life. So my transition out was, it was easier on the aspect of that I had an identity and I had purpose. Because that's, if you look at, if there's one thing that, not just the population that I come from, but any human being, when you wake up in the morning, if you don't know why you should continue the struggle of life, when your feet hit the floor, then you're going to have, it's going to be hard, but.
Very true.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. I need to ask one question, though. I mean, or two questions, really. There is, on the one hand, we have got the role of the military to create warriors. And the more you become sort of an elite warrior, the more you look into the white of the eyes of your opponent. And this is no longer you somewhere where flying a drone and dropping some bombs and think, oh, that was like Halo or like any other video game that I've played as a junior. So if I look back in time to the special forces of the Second World War or of those in the Vietnam War, inevitably those people who you could truly, without a negative connotation, call assassins, direct killers, many of them had huge amount of trauma, a huge amount of destruction, and then couldn't cope with it down the line. So whilst we are creating these extremely efficient killing machines, we're also killing some of their humanity and some of their things. So there is that one side of the military, but is it not that for every soldier who is in that combat role, that there are 7 to 10 who are removed from that combat role to support that? Yes. You don't just need the bullets, you need the beans. So therefore, what is the issue? I mean, I understand this particular group of people being set up to fail, and when it comes to the return into the civilian life. But is that the same throughout the whole military? Or do we only see literally combat veterans killing themselves?
No, it's from the support elements also, because multiple reasons, deployed to combat zone, there could have been mortar strikes, they could have been on a convoy, take a mechanic or a cook or someone who normally wouldn't be on the front lines and you take the aspect of the human mind and the human brain. If I thought that I was going to die, then that's real.
Absolutely.
Now, whether there was no way I could die or not is irrelevant.
Correct.
Because let's say if I'm on a forward operating base, in Baghdad or wherever, in Bagram, wherever, and when there's rockets coming in and there's mortars coming in and there's suicide bombers, the aspect of death to yourself is present. It still can create those same kind of issues. Actually, it does. It actually makes it, from my perspective, it makes it a little bit even more, what's the right word? Not dramatic, but just the thought that I could be blown up at any moment. You know what I mean? On my end, we were getting blown up, and it kind of fit, the context of what we were doing. And so we were, like, to your point, I had spent, by the time 9/11 happened, I had spent 11 years becoming the warrior that I became.
Yeah.
That hardness, like you said, that training, that level of escalation and toughness and experience. I was pretty prepared. Now, let's say you take an 18-year-old, who was just in high school 6 months earlier, and now they're sitting in a combat zone.
Nice. Yeah.
I mean,
makes perfect sense. Who hasn't had that exposure, not that fear inoculation, not that transitional growth, and not transitional, the kind of step-by-step growth into that role. That makes a hell of a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, now that explains that. Wow. Okay. I certainly have learned something. I didn't appreciate that difference also in the adaptation to fear, adaptation to the environment. Wow.
Yeah, because I have a lot of experience with it at Warrior's Heart. I've got this nice little test subjects that come to me, obviously much more than that. But just speaking of it funnily.
Little guinea pigs.
See,
come on.
And the one thing that this population, I don't know if it's a human thing, it may be, but this population, one of the predominant traits is they all minimize their own trauma.
Of course.
It's like, well, I experienced this, but Stephan, you experienced this, so I really don't. I don't deserve to sit here with you. So I take myself out, of the healing game.
Exactly. I was the victim of a gang violence at age 13, and it took me to age 46 until 46, no, less, more, 50s, early 50s, until I recognized the impact of it. I had just exactly the same thing. I was just looking at the pictures. Yes, I was beaten up, and yes, I had missed that knife by this much, but there's nothing. It's nothing, my ass. Of course, it was far more. Yeah. Okay. Perfectly said. Okay.
Yeah. And most of and here's the thing too, but again, I'm so fortunate of being in the situation that I'm in and all the years of, focusing on this population and myself included. It's not really the trauma and like, even with the assassin, I mean, the perfect word for it is assassins. Like you said, you're trained to kill people. Like that's without churching it up. You know what I mean? That's just what it is. So even with that class of folks that do that, and they come, say, to Warrior's Heart or to any other kind of treatment, they're in their minds, the reason why they are the way they are is because of this war trauma, or this with law enforcement officers, this trauma they've experienced on the street. With the majority of them, not all of them, say 80% rule, that's only about 20% of it. The rest of it is the core beliefs and stuff that happened to them when they were a child growing up.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful. It's so true. So true.
Because, those things, though, but like, those things, like you said, that took you many years in life to understand that, so many things, decisions made after that went back to that moment. It also is who makes us who we are. So it's not a horrible thing. It's just, I love how we talk in recovery, is like, hey, is this serving me or is it not serving me? Is it working or not working? Because those survival skills that I use to survive will be the same skills that kill me later in life if I'm not addressing the unprocessed trauma, the core beliefs, those kind of things, which is just a human element. Not doesn't matter what your profession is and what you've done. That's just a human characteristic. And you said that one word, especially in the population that I was in, myself anyway, of humanity. You know what I mean? That's again, if you're a sociopath or a psychopath, you don't really have any problems with death and destruction and horror, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're a human being, part of the human race, then like myself, that was one of the things that I struggled with the most was even though I don't regret anything that I had done, actually only regret that I couldn't do more of it. But it still chipped away of my humanity, you know, because of all the different things that I was done, because I'm a human being. And my core belief as a human being is that human beings were not made to harm other human beings. I just really, it just is what makes sense to me. However, in the history of human beings, there's always been war. So that's with the gifts that I was given and the way that I'm wired. You know, I mean, I was a professional soldier. You know, because that was my God-given talents and what I was really good at. But that's why also I needed a lot more training on how to enter back into the human race, you know, and how to deal with that moral trauma, you know, moral injury and moral grief, you know, because a lot of the things that I experience isn't post-traumatic stress. I mean, there's some of it that is, but the majority of it is moral grief, moral injury, moral trauma.
And that is really something that has only been more recently been described and is coming out. There are some beautiful books out there about the moral injury of soldiers and the toll it takes on us as human beings to be a soldier. So it's beautiful that this is being recognized. Yet at the same token, here you came out of the Special Forces community where seeking help was very much frowned upon and probably still is. Because the moment you say, well, I've got PTSD or I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z, people say, well, are you fit to be deployed? Are you fit to be part of that group? So people shy probably away. Is that still the case? I would say yes, but I mean, you are there on the front line. Is that still the case?
Partly. It's so much better. Let's say over the last 15 years, just to pick years, and we're talking about the military was an institution that is very hard to change and takes decades, right? So, but over the last 15 years, phenomenal changes have occurred. And there's still that same stigma. But the good thing is, it's not so much the institution as a whole. It's more so members of the institution, the old guard, you know, like the guys like I used to be, you know, like if you can't handle it, you should have picked a different profession, you know.
Exactly.
So there's still some of the old guard, but the beauty of it is the institution itself has shifted to much more, because that was always the reason why I didn't get help whenever I wanted to or should have. And some of the guys now is still the same as like, hey, I didn't want to lose my job. You know, I don't want to lose my security clearance, you know, which there's some aspects and depending on the job that you have, you know, hey, that's a choice that you need to make for it. But to answer your question, it has gotten much, much better. And, you know, it still exists, you know, but with it depends on the leaders that are in charge of whatever element that you're in charge of. Because, you know, one good leader in the big position changes everything. One bad leader in the position changes everything. So it comes down to the human so much. But I'm happy to say that institutionally, we've shifted more towards seeking help doesn't equal instant death of your career.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I guess it really had to happen from an institutional point of view as well, because there was certainly a time with the increasing deployments where suddenly the rate of, as I said, domestic violence, the killing of wives of soldiers became something. Oh yeah, that's happened again there and there in that barracks,
Right.
After a while, the journalists are getting hungry for these kind of things, so there had to be a bit
Oh,
of
yes.
damage limitation at some stage. Bloody hell! But with all that, I mean, it is it. We've today we've looked at so many reasons why warriors are more likely to fall prey to alcohol, to drugs, to and often quite understandably so. If we think about the drugs, you mentioned the prescription painkillers. How many
Right.
soldiers have been injured either in the as part of training accidents or as part of being deployed? And once you are in severe pain, well, you get painkillers, and if you are not dealing with the underlying emotional pain, if you have never learned how to accept negative emotions, if you have always been trying to escape them, push them away, numb them, then suddenly that oxycodone is actually a very tempting thing. What
It
is the
is.
incidence of drug addiction towards prescription medications? Do you
So I
see?
don't know the percentages, but the majority of the warriors that I've seen that have came in, say, on heroin addictions,
Mm,
is and thank God I didn't have to go down that route, but I've from their mouths, the experienced folks is that that's what happened, multiple surgeries, say from a battlefield injury.
mm,
And then they're on the Percocets, they're on the opiates, and then they turn the opiates off. And
mm,
because the underlying additions, heroin provides the same relief that comes, but now it's a street drug. So that was the transition for many of the soldiers, that from being medically harmed, from getting wounded,
mm,
and it translates right over to next thing they were upstanding human being, a hero, with a family, and then went down this road, and now, they're a drug addict, and,
mm.
with a heroin needle seeking him. Yeah. So it's very sad, that it is, but
Tom, you're an amazing man. And to hear your journey and to see you doing the full circle of the 12 steps and now giving back, while still accepting that your body is very keen to escape reality. You
right.
understand that opportunity for you to actually abuse, use is always there, is so beautiful. It's so refreshing, because often enough when you are I mean, I was not drinking for a hell of a long time, and I had a relapse over Christmas just because of some severe trauma,
Right.
divorce, family disaster, and boom, I was back off the
Right.
wagon, and I thought, okay. Now, having said that, in my case, I've actually learned from it, and that's always the
Yes,
good
of
thing.
course.
So one step back, 3 steps forward. So that's the
Mhm.
cool thing. But having said that, uh, there is always the risk that we fall back into some coping mechanisms that probably have helped us since our childhood, which many of us
Right.
don't realize, as you were wisely saying, and then later on that we have perfected as teens in our adult life. So there's so much going on, so much more than the cliches of I'm a veteran and or
Right.
I'm whatever label you want to put on yourself. There is
Right.
so much more, and therefore it is uh, a unique opportunity, I think, for all of us to realize that trauma is a bitch, but it also allows us to grow. It allows
Absolutely.
us to stop for a moment and to learn how to feel, to learn how to
Mhm.
recognize your emotions, to name them,
Yes.
because only then you can tame them. It is an opportunity to become better fathers, better sons, better all the roles that we have got in our lives. To actually be an addict or have an addictive trait can be a superpower.
Yes, it
A
can.
very destructive power, but it can be a superpower if you wield the sword in the right way. But it's a double-edged sword, so be careful
Yeah,
what you
yes,
do.
it is.
Isn't it? And it's the same with PTSD. I've written a book chapter. PT is my superpower. PTSD is my superpower, and it made me a better doctor. It's hard for you to
Absolutely.
catch me out in my professional life. So there is this 10% good, and then there's the 90% that has ruled my life for a long time with all the
Right.
negative consequences. But I think we all have got the opportunity to grow through the challenges that life is throwing at us. Some of us are just a bit further down the path, and you clearly are beautiful. You have not just transformed yourself and grown tremendously and solidified all those wins into the person that you are now, but you've also founded Warrior's Heart, and you've founded a institution or a group of people who are now out there to help others to transition and transform into a better human, to
Yes.
make sense of their suffering, to make sense of what has occurred to them, to make them realize that that there's so much more to their story than they often recognize themselves when they're in the darkness. There are so
Yes.
many beautiful things that you and your organization are doing. I want to say thank you. Whilst I'm not a veteran, I very much recognize that that it is so easy to fall prey to the darkness and to be in the darkness and to believe the lies that mental health problems and addiction tell us. There is no hope. There is no future. You're a failure. And I could go on for hours there.
I know.
That's the 4 o'clock
Me
Stephan
both.
in the morning, okay? So thank you so much for the work you're doing. If people sort of listen to you and think, wow, I want to know more about Warrior Heart, where can they find you? Where can they find your institution?
It's at warriorsheart.com. Kept it nice and simple. And everything, we'll go to warriorsheart.com. There's loads of information on there. And there'll be a telephone number on there, to call it in. That gets one of our, what we call it, admissions advocates. And we call them advocates for a reason, because obviously if you meet the criteria, we want you to come to Warrior's Heart, but it doesn't matter. They will immediately start advocating for that military member, that veteran, that first responder, and try and find them the help that they need.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So it's,
guys, look down there into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast. Tom's details, or Warrior's Heart's detail. Warrior's Heart detail is down there. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you so much for having come onto my show here today. You certainly talked about, or we both explored some very complex topics, but
right.
with honesty and with empathy, I guess. It's so easy to put blame or to just disregard things. For example, the divide of 99% of people who have not served in the military. I was not aware of that, and explains so much more why there might not be the support out there, at least on a daily basis or on a recognition basis kind of thing. So I have learned a lot, and I'm sure that a lot of people out there have too, and hopefully many veterans have who are listening will see that some of the voices in their heads are just bullshit and are just crap, and that there is help out there and that there is hope out there. No,
Absolutely, there is.
brilliant. You're an amazing man. Thank you very much for being a guest on my show. Eh?
Stephan, thank you for having me. It was a true pleasure. Much gratitude. Thank you.
And you guys out there, look after yourself. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.